All right, we're going to go ahead and get started tonight. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to our program tonight. I want to welcome you. My name is Pat Kane. I'm Public Programs and Visitor Services Coordinator at the Museum of the Grand Prairie, part of the Champaign County Forest Preserve District. And I want to thank all of you, most importantly, for joining us tonight for the kickoff event of our Garden Speaker Series, an annual speaker series we do every year. I want to especially thank tonight's guest, Dr. Michael Ward, for joining us to present the program, How to Design a Garden for Birds. Before we get into tonight's program, I did want to go over a few housekeeping items, a few events coming up in the near future, a little bit more information. So first, I see that quite a few of you have done this already, but let us know where you're watching from tonight. Really like to see where you all are watching from this evening. So right in the comment section down below where you're watching from. We got quite a few people writing in already. We got Sally watching from Minnesota. We got Diane watching from Leroy, Illinois. Chris and D-Land, Barbara, Lake County, Molly and Normal, Ray and Whiteland, Indiana. Got some folks here from Champaign, Illinois. Watching from Urbana 365 Things to Do in Lockport, Illinois. Somebody watching from Virginia, Rolana. Folks watching from Fisher, Detroit, Michigan, Valparaiso, Indiana, all over the place. So thank you all so much for tuning in tonight. Let us know where you're watching from by writing it down in the comment section down below. Another thing you can do is you can click that share button so you can share this stream, so you can watch alongside your friends, so we all can enjoy ourselves tonight, be with each other, even though we can't be physically together. We could be with each other virtually. So share this stream with your friends by clicking that share button. A little bit about us at the Museum of the Grand Prairie. Museum of the Grand Prairie opened originally as the Early American Museum in 1968, and our current mission is to collect, preserve, and interpret the cultural and natural history of Champaign County in East Central Illinois. Now, we also operate as part of the Champaign County Forest Preserve District, which is a collection of 7 forest preserves, educational facilities, golf course, and a Kickapoo Rail Trail right here in Central Illinois. Tonight's program is the first in our annual garden speaker series, and the series is virtual for the first time ever this year. We hope you can join us each month, of course, starting this month here in January, every month until April of this year for more speakers in the series. And with the large amount of time everyone is spending at home these days, the theme for this year's Garden Speaker Series is How to at Home, with programs focusing on how to garden in various ways at your own home. Our next program in the series will occur on Thursday, February 18th at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, as Ken Robertson of Illinois Natural History Survey and Jack Zinnan of the University of Illinois Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Sciences will present the program titled How to Use the Diversity of Native Plants in Your Garden. Again, the date and time of that program is Thursday, February 18th at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. A few other things coming up. Martin Luther King Day is on Monday, this Monday, and we invite you to help us honor and continue the service of MLK in a few virtual ways. Earlier this week, our educators handed out craft bags with kids' crafts and child-sized masks, and included activities to help spread kindness and empathy, much like MLK worked to do when he was alive. We'll also hold a few other virtual events on Monday. At 10 a.m., we will rebroadcast a popular panel discussion from 2019, where we had local African-American community members visit us at the museum, and we hosted a panel discussion where they reflected on the year 1968 and identified what that era in history could teach us about today. The day will round out with a virtual read aloud of Child of the Civil Rights Movement by Paula Young Shelton and illustrated by Raul Colon. All of these virtual events can be found on our Facebook and YouTube pages on Monday, January 18th. On Tuesday, January 19th, from 10 to 10:30 a.m., hope you can join us for our regular program, our series, Mornings with the Museum. The theme for this edition of this live Q&A event will be the wonders of winter, where staff members will share stories related to the winter season, hear about extraordinary winter weather from our area's past, artifacts or local history stories related to winter, as well as live answers to your virtual audience questions. Again, that's on January 19th, Tuesday from 10 to 10:30 on our Facebook and YouTube page. Lastly, we hope you can take part in the virtual program titled 19 Suffragists, 19 Historic Homes on Thursday, January 28th at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, live again on our Facebook and YouTube pages. In celebration of women's suffrage and the 19th Amendment, Museum and Education Department Director Dr. Barb Garvey, PhD, will take you on a virtual house tour. She'll highlight 19 places in Champaign County that once were the province of prominent local suffragists while discussing their contribution to the movement and to the community. Again, that program is on January 28th at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. For more info about all these programs and everything else happening at the Museum of the Grand Prairie and the Champaign County Forest Preserve District, we encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, as well as visit museumofthegrandprairie.org and ccfpd.org. Again, let us know where you're watching from tonight. We got Carolyn from Naperville, Jermaine from McKendree Township in Vermilion County. We have Marcia from Champaign, Angie from Monticello. So please let us know where you're watching from tonight. Now, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Michael P. Ward. Again, I want to thank Mike for joining us tonight to present this program. I know a lot of us are very excited about this program. So, Mike, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. So Dr. Mike Ward is originally from Jacksonville, Illinois, and received his PhD from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign in 2004. He is currently an associate professor in the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Sciences in the College of Agricultural, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences at the University of Illinois, and an ornithologist at the Illinois Natural History Survey. He and his students are working on a variety of projects involving avian ecology and conservation throughout the Midwest, but also in Texas, Mexico, and Cuba. So let's give a warm virtual welcome to Mike Ward. Thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciate you being here with us tonight.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Let me get my slideshow going here. Yeah, so hopefully you can see this. So again, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to talk to you all about what you guys can do in your backyard for birds. So as Pat laid out, that I'm a avian person, so I study birds. But I have my dad was a nurseryman, so I have a real interest in what we all can do to help with bird conservation. And given the current pandemic, there's been a lot of interest, and I'll talk about this later in the talk today. But if you go across the world, there's been a huge uptake in people feeding birds. I mean, in some places you can't even buy birdseed because there's such a demand. Parks that are at capacity. The number of people bird watching has gone through the roof, and so there's been a lot more interest in the environment now that we have some time to really sit back and enjoy the environment in some cases. And it's impressive to me hearing from where all you guys are from, but thinking about just kind of here in Illinois, a person's backyard, all these birds in this picture could easily use your backyard, and so there's great diversity and there's great potential, no matter if you have a big backyard or you kind of live in an apartment, to help bird populations and seabirds in your yard. And so kind of the outline for today, we'll be talking about what birds are we attracting? So why would they stop in your yard? So that's important. So obviously there's lots of different things you can do in your backyard. And by understanding what the birds are doing in your yard, you can then create a habitat that both attracts and keeps the birds in your yard. And then gardening and kind of management, right? So I work a lot with management organizations, Department of Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife, and they do management, right? Doing burns or creating new habitats. Well, I mean, you guys can do that kind of on a smaller scale in your backyard. We'll talk about threats that birds face and then what the future might hold for birds in your backyard. So we can kind of break this down into breeding birds, wintering birds, and migratory birds, stopping over in your yard. And so a lot of you might be familiar with the breeding birds we have here in Illinois, and these this list right here is pretty much true for Eastern North America. And we're really kind of lucky. We really, I think, take for granted the birds that we have in our backyard, cardinals and doves and finches and hawks. If you go over to other parts of the world, say Europe, for example, you go around London, you're lucky to see 1 or 2 species of birds. You go over to China, again, couple species, and that would be it. And so mainly due to persecution of birds, but here in North America, we have lots of bird species that we can attract to our backyard. This picture right here is of a mourning dove. And it changes throughout the year, which is exciting. So one of the reasons why millions of people in the United States are bird watchers is that what I would see going out in my backyard tomorrow is going to be fundamentally different than what I'll see going out there in a couple months. And so in winter, we have a bunch of birds that come down from up north. So this year has been a particularly great year for this pictured bird right here, which is the pine siskin. So these birds breed in the boreal forests. For this year, for some reason, the amount of food in the boreal forest is really limited. And so we've seen a big influx of these siskins and crossbills and other birds coming down. And so throughout the year, you get lots of different birds showing up in your backyard. And what I think is some of the most exciting backyard birding and things we can do for birds is migratory birds. So this is just a small list of the migratory birds that are wintering in Central or South America and breeding mostly in the boreal forests or up in the Arctic. But as they come through Illinois, your yard could be very important for them to stop over, get some food, and then continue their journey. And so we'll talk a little bit about this. One way we know there's lots of birds around is actually through Nexrad Radar. So as you guys might be watching the news because of the snow coming in or rain, you'll see that there's, the Nexrad Radar picks up clouds coming in, but it also picks up birds. So this picture on the left where all the towns are on there, that's showing at dusk where birds are lifting off out of the cities to migrate. So and they filtered this out before they show this on our local news stations, but we can use the data. And here in Central and Northern Illinois, it's clear as a bell that a lot of the birds that migrate through are using urban areas. So you'll see, Springfield and Decatur and Champaign and Peoria all light up at night as the birds fly out at night and migrate. So you should note that most birds migrate at night, right? So they eat all day and then migrate all night. And so your backyard can be very important. Here on the left, the picture of the Midwest, these are the different Nexrad stations. And this was a particularly busy night for migration. You can see some weather coming in through the Dakotas and in Minnesota, but all those other things lighten up. Those are millions of birds that are migrating overhead. So these birds are migrating all night. The sun comes up and all of a sudden they're like, where do I go? Right? So especially here in Champaign County, but throughout the Midwest and throughout almost the world, we've changed a lot of the landscapes. So as the sun comes up, they need to find a spot where they can go during the day to stay safe and to feed. And that's where your backyard becomes important. So what are these birds doing all day? This is a picture of a rose-breasted grosbeak and a Baltimore oriole. And what they are doing is eating. So we want fat birds. We need to have fat is the energy that allows birds to migrate. And so when they're in your backyard, what they're looking for is a safe spot where they can get fat. And the reason for this and why it's all important, I think I'm a big believer in everyone can do their part, is some research that we have done in the Yucatan Peninsula. So this is the Gulf of Mexico. Obviously, that's the Yucatan Peninsula down at the bottom. This was some data where we tracked birds leaving Mobile area of Alabama as they went down to the Gulf of Mexico. And we know that fat's important because if they weren't fat enough, they wouldn't even try to go across. But some of the ones that went across with not enough fat, we'd find like this bird right here washed up on shore where it just ran out of energy and just, couldn't keep itself out of the ocean. We also know from research on sharks, the #1 content of the shark's belly, like tiger sharks underneath oil rigs, is birds, like orioles and thrashers and tangers. Well, obviously these sharks aren't jumping out of the water eating these birds. These birds are running out of fat as they're migrating across the Gulf of Mexico and falling into the water. And so what you can do is having a backyard that allows these birds to get fat will make it so when they get down to the coast, they can go across. we actually find down at the coast, because there's so much development down there and condos and developments that destroy the habitat, that they really need to get fat and stay fat on their way down, because it's difficult for them to get fat once they reach the actual Gulf Shore. So that brings us to the question about what are they doing in your backyard? And this is important to, if you're thinking about planting trees or taking trees out or whatever you're doing in your backyard and you're interested in birds, it's important to know what they're doing back there. So first off, what do they eat? And this varies across the year. So right now, most of the birds are eating seeds. That's why obviously bird feeders are so popular, because you have a good bird feeder out, a lot of birds will be there. But I also should note that a lot of birds are still trying to eat insects, especially like nuthatches and creepers and kinglets will be on your trees in the bark trying to find little insects to eat. In the spring, pretty much all the birds eat insects. In the summer, all the birds eat insects and feed the insects that are young. But then in fall, your yard becomes important for not only supporting insect populations, but also fruit. And we'll talk about lots of different plants you can plant in your yard that will have fruit that a lot of these birds need. So that research I was just talking about down in the Yucatan Peninsula, a lot of the birds we were tracking are getting fat off fruit as they migrate south. Also, it's important to think about where birds might sleep. Dense shrubs, dense trees, cavities, all these areas are important areas for birds to be able to survive in your backyard. That's why we a lot of times promote really dense plantings, or some species are going to use nest boxes. Right now, where most of you guys are at, we have Carolina wrens. They're a little bird that like to go in your garage or in your back shed or somewhere near your house to stay warm. They like cavities, and so having little bird boxes outside can be a great benefit to some of these birds. And then we have birds breeding in our neighborhood, in our backyard. Sometimes they breed in spots where we don't want them. This picture of a robin up on the top, I get lots of people emailing me over the summer about, I have a house finch, I have a robin that's nesting right here and pooping all over the place. What can I do? Well, it's not much you can do. Though if you do have robins, like to be in areas that are safe. And so the more trees you have, the more cover, they'd probably much rather go there than breed in your house. But having dense shrubs, trees, cavities, birdhouses, and even your own house, these are all places where birds can breed. Depending on the bird, there's going to be more or less opportunities in your yard. But I think it should note that there's a lot more birds breeding in your yard than you might think. In the summers, I hire a dozen people or so to go out and find bird nests. And I don't know if you ever tried to find a bird nest, but it's hard. And we've done some work in urban areas, and there's a lot more, like this bird right here, red-bellied woodpecker. I have these nesting in my yard, and they have a hole in a tree right above my garage, and you would never know they're there, right? You just got to look closely. And so lots of birds are breeding in your yard that you might not even know. So what habitat do we need to attract birds to our backyard? A lot of it comes down to structure, having layers and plants, hopefully native. We'll talk a little bit about this. That can provide cover, but also insects and berries. So when I talk about structure, birds really respond to structure, not particular plants. There's very few birds that say, I'm only going to hang out in this plant. Now this drives botanists crazy, right? So your next talk with talking about prairies or other areas like that, those are great and they're good for insects, but birds really just like structure. So in this picture here, you see you got a little bit of open area on the ground, a little bit of cover, and then we have different layers. And so this was it's an area we worked up in Wisconsin, but it depicts the structure we're looking for, and you can move that into your backyard. So this is a particularly good backyard. As you can see, lots of flowers, but also some different types of trees, cover on different layers, and that's what we're looking for, right? So in nature, we have this canopy, we have subcanopy, we have understory, and we have the forest floor. And essentially, the best backyards have all this. Now, the forest floor is by far the hardest to replicate if you live in urban areas. Now, if you live out in the country, you can do this. But beyond forest floor, the rest of these we can do. We can try to create canopy, different layers, different densities of a habitat in your backyard. So the goal is to attain structure and layers via native shrubs, trees, grasses, and forbs. And just a quick list of some shrubs that we use that are kind of common around here. And some of you might know some of these. Some of these are going to be more of trees. Some of these more are going to be small shrubs. Others are going to be almost what we consider weeds. So for example, pokeberry, a lot of people would consider this a weed. It is poisonous to humans, but it's a good nutritional source for birds. We have a lot of this in my yard, and it can get out of control, but it does provide a lot of food for birds. So I typically leave it if I can, because birds like this bird, which is a catbird, just love it. So we did some work with catbirds, and one way you know they love it is when you catch them, birds tend to want to poop on you, and so their poop will be purple from pokeberries. They just eat them up all day long. This is a black-throated green warbler, a pretty small bird that you might think would eat insects, but in fall they really like pokeberries. And then bluebirds. So our bluebird populations are really coming back strong throughout the Midwest, particularly around here in Illinois. And in fact, we still have bluebirds. I saw a couple of bluebirds out of Homer Lake just 2 days ago, and they really like pokeberry as well. Now, we can get on the other end of this where there are invasives that are botanically and from a habitat perspective not ideal, but they also provide habitat and cover for birds. So, typically we think of bush honeysuckle as an evil exotic species. I know the Forest Preserve District has done a lot of work to remove this because it really can overwhelm a forest and cause problems. I have a couple of these in my backyard. I fought them for a while to keep them out, but I just couldn't, because there's so much where I live out in St. Joe that we just can't keep it out. And so now I just try to keep it under control in my backyard. And this time of year, I don't know if you've noticed, but this year we particularly have lots of robins around. So the reason these robins are sticking around is because honeysuckle berries persist very long into the winter, and robins can live on these berries until it starts getting warm, and that allows them not to migrate south. They can hang around here in the cold, and you might think, why would they do that? They're freezing their butts off. Why would you stay here? But the first one back, it's the best territories. And so it's a trade-off between staying cold but getting the best territory in March, or going down to Florida, taking it easy, but by the time you get back, you won't get your good territory. Serviceberry is one of the great plants for birds. It has good fall color. It has berries that you can actually eat. And you can tell it's a great plant for birds because these berries, as soon as they get ripe, go like gangbusters, right? So whether it's cedar waxwings or blue grosbeaks or cardinals or robins, I have a couple of these in my yard, and yeah, the ripe berries don't make it a week or two, right? So they're a great value. It's a native shrub. Again, it's pretty tough. You can put it kind of anywhere. You can keep it small as a shrub. You can let it get tall as a kind of a medium-sized tree. It's just a great a tree for wildlife. In fact, squirrels like it too. They'll go up there and eat other berries as well. Again, the berries are good given how fast they disappear. That's also interesting. Honeysuckle is not actually a great. That's why the honeysuckle berries are still around, because nutritiously they're not great, and so from a nutrient standpoint, and so they're kind of the last to be eaten. But there's so many of them that it can keep birds alive if they need them. All right, we'll talk a little bit about trees now. So trees have a lot of importance in terms of structure for them to nest in or to put their nests in, but really the value of trees is the insects they harbor. So this is a big oak tree, and there's lots of research out there now showing that hardwood trees support way more what we call Lepidoptera, so caterpillars, larvae, and that these larvae are very critical for both migrating birds and for breeding birds. So hardwoods such as oaks, hickories, and kind of not really hardwoods, but kind of in-between trees like locust and tulip trees, persimmons, chestnut. They now have a new variety of chestnut that's apparently resistant to the blight. Hackberry, And even cherry trees, which around here are wild cherry trees. They're hardwoods, but not in the same realm as oaks and hickories, are extremely important. We've done a lot of research where we go out there, cut some leaves off, look at how much insects are on the leaves, and compare that, look at how many birds are out there, and all kind of everything being equal, getting any of these trees in your backyard is a great value. And some of these trees grow quick, right? So tulip trees, you can put one out in a few years, it'll be pretty big. Obviously oak trees and hickories grow a little slower, but kind of mixing and matches those in your yard can really lead to some really good areas for wildlife. And kind of going back to talking about cities and that map of the Nexrad Radar map of Illinois, when we talk with the city planners or city foresters, particularly in Chicagoland area, we're always stressing, planting oaks and hickories. So thinking about the future. So in 50 years, your backyards are probably going to be some of the really important habitats for conservation, particularly for migratory birds. We already know that we're facing an insect apocalypse, right? So there was just a series of papers came out in the Proceedings National Academy of Sciences a couple of days ago, and we're doing our own research on this, trying to understand where our insects still are and why they're still there. We have a research on whippoorwills. So some of you that grew up in the Midwest might have remembered whippoorwills singing at night, keeping you up. Their populations are crashing. From poor Champaign County, they're gone from Champaign County, and they're pretty much gone from Maine County as well. We do insect sampling and try to understand where the moths, this picture at the bottom right hand is just a one night's traps worth of insects. This is from an area over by the Illinois River in a really high quality area. When we do this in the Champaign County, we get a few June bugs and maybe a couple cabbage white butterflies. And so what we can do is, by having really good plants in our yard that support good moth populations, and that'll lead to a healthy ecosystem. Some more trees that can be very beneficial. Pawpaw, kind of a small tree, benefits both pollinators and butterflies and food for wildlife. Pecans, right? We're kind of the northern edge of where some pecans are, but again, a large tree, lots of food for wildlife. Let's pick a couple other ones here. A lot of the oaks, lots of diversity of oaks out there, small oaks, big oaks. One bird that some people might be familiar with is red-headed woodpecker. I was just working on data a couple of days ago on their population decline, and it's sad. It went from one of the most common woodpecker in Illinois 40 years ago to being pretty rare, and we think it's because of the lack of acorns for them to keep themselves alive over winter. And there's a series of what we call kind of lower quality trees, right? So it's better to have a tree than have nothing at all out there, but ashes, maples, elms, these for some reason do not support the insect populations that other do. I mean, they still be used by birds. You see lots of robin nests in these trees. And I mean, again, they're better than nothing, but if you have a choice, we strongly, if you're thinking about birds, we would suggest other things, right? So the ash trees right now obviously are a pretty poor choice given the emerald ash borer that's decimating ashes throughout Illinois. But interestingly, as all these ashes die, it's probably going to be a big boom for woodpeckers eating insects out of these ash trees. But we'll have to see over the next few years how that all plays out. So one thing I get asked a lot, and it's a tricky question, about planting natives, exotics, or cultivars. Years ago, we were working with Mayor Daley up in Chicago on what to do along Lakeshore Drive and areas down by the Soldier Field. And we're really promoting planting natives and trying to avoid exotic species and cultivars. And over time, I still think everything else being equal, natives are the way to go. But there are times like pine trees aren't native to much of central Illinois, other than maybe cedars, which aren't really a pine. But, they don't become invasive. They're exotic, but they don't become a problem. And, yews, right? So on our U of I campus, there's yews all over the place. And as I walk to go teach class, I'll see lots of birds using that very dense cover. And they don't, at least not yet, it's been hundreds of years, they haven't spread out into the environment and caused a problem. And so there are non-native plants that aren't going to become a problem in our native habitats that are of benefit in your backyard. Again, such as arborvitae, mountain ash. This picture right here is a picture of white-winged crossbill. I mentioned before how it's been a tremendous year for white-winged crossbills. I saw one in Urbana a couple weeks ago, and I know there's one hanging around somewhere around Busey Woods. And what it's doing is it's eating spruce seeds out of cones of spruce in some of the cemeteries in the Urbana area. All right, so gardening and management. So what can you do kind of in the context of this to benefit birds? So bird feeders, hummingbird feeders, mowing, dead leaves, and nesting areas. So first off, the influence of bird feeders. So I get asked a lot about, are bird feeders bad? Are they good? So the data would suggest that they're really not, they're kind of benign, right? So they're going to help some birds. Mourning doves, they, if it's -20 out, birds stay alive by what they can eat, right? So as long as they have enough food, they can create their metabolic heat and stay alive. And that's why when you see big die-offs of birds, it happens after ice storms when it's halfway warm, because they just can't get through the ice. They don't die of the cold. But that being said, they do like your feeder, right? That's why when it's cold out, snowy, they go to your feeder first. But we do management on a population level. And so it might keep an individual or two alive here and there, but on the population level, it probably is not hurting anything or helping anything. The flip side of that coin is I think they're extremely important for people to appreciate birds, right? So I have a feeder in my backyard. I have some kids at home and try to educate them on what the birds are out there. They're still not getting all their identifications correct on what the birds are, but they're trying. And so, having a bird feeder where you can see the cardinal or blue jay come in, I think it helps people get a better appreciation. I think that's a big benefit of bird feeders. Now, hummingbird feeders are a little bit different. There is some evidence, and I'll play, this is an animation from Cornell, from eBird. This is the migration of hummingbirds in the spring heading up. And then on the side, you can see it's going through the year, and then they come back down. We did some research on hummingbirds looking at whether they cross the Gulf of Mexico or not. And what we found is when we tag birds, so we have some really amazing technology that University of Illinois engineers has helped us develop, that we can track small birds. I mean, we're putting a 0.2 gram transmitter on this hummingbird. Well, the hummingbirds are not migrating across the Gulf of Mexico, even though they're going down here. What they're doing is they're jumping between trailer parks of snowbirds that go down to the coast for the winter and have a hummingbird feeder, on their mobile home and their RV, and then they just bounce their way all the way around the Gulf of Mexico until they get down to southern Mexico and Central America. And so that's one bird where feeders definitely have impacted their populations and changes their behavior. But I don't necessarily know it's a bad thing. It's just they're just being smart, right? They're just taking advantage of the resources they have. Mowing. So mowing is one of these things in my classes I teach at the university. I talk a lot about, why to mow, right? So this top picture, I know people out where I live that complain, I just spent 2 hours mowing my backyard. Well, there's an obvious solution to that. Don't mow it, right? Change it into something else. On campus, we have these no-mow zones where we allow areas to grow up. We save gas by not mowing it. It provides habitat. It's not a coincidence that if you look on at least the University of Illinois campus, you look where kestrels are at, the little falcon that eats little insects and mice. They're in the areas where we have no mow areas, right? And so I'm a big proponent of, if you don't need to mow it, don't mow it. There's lots of ways to put in native plants. I mean, you can let grasses grow, or you can try to create a small prairie or kind of a successional area. If you do have to mow, it's good not to do early season mowing. We work with a lot of different organizations on providing guidance on when to mow. So if you wait to mow until July, it allows birds and mammals, reptiles, a lot of things, to at least get one brood off, right? And gets those young to a point where when you do mow, you're not going to mow them up. And I really think that culturally we mow, right? So it comes back from European heritage and the idea of having a manor estate where everything's perfectly, manicured. And if you ask people why they mow, a lot of times they can't really tell you. I mean, other than, well, my spouse wants me to mow, or the city has an ordinance. But if we can get past that cultural barrier and just allow some more messiness into the environment, I think it can really go a long ways to helping some of our wildlife. And so that's why we talk about it with these students, 20-year-olds in my class about, once they make their millions and have their estate, why mow acres of land? Put it into some other habitat. And even though it might not be the best habitat in the world, it's still going to add a little bit to the environment. And I personally think they're pretty. I mean, again, it's a cultural thing, whether you think it's pretty or not. But, I think there's lots of value to having some no-mow areas. Also, leaves, right? So this is one of the things when the leaves fall, you got to rake them up. They're kind of a pain. There was a really interesting study that came out early this year out of New York showing that a lot of birds, insects, survive in these leaf litter areas, and the insects will be there, and birds like this ovenbird will go forage there. So I did kind of a little experiment in my backyard with a area near the back of my yard. I let the leaves all congregate there, and it's clear as a bell that white-throated sparrows and juncos, all those birds are foraging in that area underneath the leaves, because those leaves provide a micro habitat for some of these insects to kind of make it. And I know the leaves kill grass. You can mulch them later in the year. The moral of the story from this study was either mulch them or leave them for some point in time, and because they can really have a benefit for a lot of birds. Breeding areas, right? So I'm a big proponent of dead trees. I think dead trees can provide habitat. They do provide habitat for woodpeckers. It's again a cultural thing, right? So years ago, I had a dead tree in my yard, and some random person stopped by and said, I'll cut that down for you for firewood. I'm like, I don't want to cut down. I want to leave it up there at least until it's going to fall, just to support insects that are going to support wildlife. I know there are safety concerns, particularly on parks and campuses where you don't want a branch falling on somebody. But I do think there's lots of opportunities to leave some dead stuff out there for a little while for nesting. And then bird houses, I think, are a great asset to have in these areas, whether it's house wrens or bluebirds or tree swallows. All of those birds, they are looking for cavities, and there's a reason why bluebird populations are doing so well, and a lot of it's because bluebird houses are out there that allow them to reproduce. All right, a little bit about threats. So the number one threat is cats. Now, so cats are very controversial. It's pretty clear that cats across the world eat billions of birds each year. If you have a cat and you want to go outside, it'll bring you back something dead as a trophy. We know that if you put bells on cats outside, cats just figure out how to get around the bell and still kill. Our advice is the best thing is keep cats indoors. We did research on campus years ago on feral cats, where I put a transmitter around their on their throat that modulated the signal to make it FM, so it's like a radio. And so I want to quantify the death screams of everything it killed, so I could kind of determine how many things they killed in a day. Well, all the cats we did that to ended up going and getting fed by people, and some people even left them in their house. And then the dean found out they were recording people's conversations in their house because these feral cats were coming in there, and so we had to stop this research. But regardless, all of these cats are out there. Keeping them indoors will be a benefit to wildlife. And the good and bad about natural backyards. So, right? So if you're going to have nature around you, you're going to have issues. Deer causing problems in your backyard, raccoons. There's a flicker living in your house. It's a catch-22, right? So a lot of people want to live near nature, but they don't want to deal with the problems. I do think there's a way, to deal with it, right? So there's definitely going to be situations where you're going to have a snake maybe in your yard that you don't like, or you're going to have some deer causing problems or a raccoon. But it's all about landscaping. Where are the areas where they want to be, whether you live near natural areas. And so there's a lot of good resources out there if you do have problems. I mean, some are harder to deal with others, like bats in your attic are hard to deal with, but having a possum in a tree, you can deal with that. Window kills. So windows kill billions of birds a year as well. This is a table from birds that just ran into windows in Toronto. This picture right here on the lower left is a Tennessee warbler. We had a project on campus picking up dead birds this year, and they picked up dozens of dead birds. This was one of my students just sent me a picture. And so there's definitely things we can do. If we want to have nature in our backyard, there's things we can do to stop it from birds running into our windows. One thing is you understand why they do it. So a lot of times birds will see reflection of trees or open sky. They might see their own reflection, like in your rearview mirror. That's rare, but that does happen. But you can kind of deal with that by putting like a plastic bag over your mirror, and they'll eventually ignore it. One issue in really dense urban areas is they see plants inside windows. This is a big problem in Chicago, down along the Gold Coast on Lakeshore Drive and Michigan Avenue, where birds are coming in off the lake. They're disoriented. They see a bunch of plants in a lobby, and they fly into the window trying to get into the lobby. One thing you can do is birds see through your house to open sky. I know several situations where people just moved around furniture in their house so it didn't look like they could fly through their house, and that stopped collisions. There's also night collisions with bright lights on buildings and lighthouses and communication towers, but that's not really obviously your backyard, and there is a lot of work being done to figure out how to stop birds from colliding with these things. So what you can do, though, is, again, kind of change the lighting behind your windows so birds don't see through the window, through your house to get out the other side. With us working at home, like you, I'm working at home, and I have found a couple birds that I've heard birds hit my window where my bird feeder is, and I have noticed that when they do that, it's because they're getting chased by a Cooper's hawk, which I don't know that much you can do about that when Cooper's hawks are chasing your birds. But decals can be used. Birds see in the ultraviolet, they see beyond the visual spectrum of humans, and there are decals that reflect in the UV. So theoretically, we don't see them, but birds see them. I don't know they work great, but they're cheap. I mean, you could try them. On campus, we're using strings or strips like this on a window so birds actually see there's something there. That seems to work very well. There's a lights out program too. This is mainly on skyscrapers where people turn off their lights at night. A great example is when we worked up in Chicago with Mayor Daley, McCormick Place. They would pick up all the dead birds every morning with a wheelbarrow, fill up a wheelbarrow of dead birds, because they left the lights on because they thought it looked cool along the Lake Michigan. Well, they didn't listen to us, but they listened to Mayor Daley, and they turned them off, and now they only get 1 or 2 at night. And so there's definitely simple things we can do to help these birds. Another email I get a lot is about hawks and owls. So people are very upset when a Cooper's hawk is hanging out at their bird feeder, or a great horned owl is eating their squirrels, or leaving dead parts of a raccoon in their yard. But I think it's important to realize this is part of a healthy ecosystem. So it's not a bad thing that we have hawks in our area. I have hawks eating on my bird feeder, and it's a little annoying, but it's just part of, again, of the healthy ecosystem. And that's why at least we're kind of lucky, right? So years ago, I was over in Britain and the UK. Just if you go over there, try to find a hawk. They're just not that many around. Go to parts of Asia. There's not very many around because the ecosystem has had a lot of issues. And so the first things that get knocked out of the ecosystem are your top predators, and that would be our hawks. And we're really lucky that in Illinois, at least, we have lots of hawks in our neighborhoods. And again, I think it's it can be annoying, but it's just a mark of a good ecosystem. So what the future might hold. So I think really we got to think about is cultural change. Messiness is okay, right? So, when I talk to my students, we talk about older generation wanting to mow everything, and they talk about, their dad complaining about having to go out and mow, and them trying to explain to them you don't have to mow, and they just cannot stop themselves from mowing. And so people seeing the messiness, urban areas being important for wildlife. A lot of our areas in Illinois around here, in the Champaign, lots of wildlife are in urban areas. Lots of the funds and the money that goes for conservation goes to where the taxpayers are, and that's in urban areas, and that's where we are putting a lot of our efforts. And so everything we can do to enhance and complement those efforts is important. And finally, conservation is tied to appreciation of nature, which really starts in your backyard. So having a backyard where kids can explore, see a spider, see a frog, that kind of stuff. It's all important, right? So there's definitely a concern these days with people being not living with, being, on their phones or on their computers and not taking part in nature. And we'll talk about in a couple minutes why it's been interesting with this pandemic to see the big influx of people going out in nature again. Another thing I think it's important to understand is, we're changing and we got to change our culture, but bird change as well. So this is a chipping sparrow and a field sparrow. These are pretty similar birds, occur in Illinois, pretty common. These are the population trends for them over time. Chipping sparrows at some point said, why am I trying to live out in natural habitats that are being destroyed? I'm going to go live in someone's backyard and nest in their blue spruce. And their populations are going exponential. We have other species like field sparrow that said, I'm not moving into towns. I'm only going to live in prairies and shrublands out in natural areas, and their populations are steadily declining. Another bird would be mourning dove. This is a complicated figure, but just to boil it up, mourning doves 100 years ago in Illinois, we have data on this, didn't live in towns. They lived out in the countryside, forests and prairies. They weren't very common. Somewhere around the 50s, they said, they decided, I'm moving into town, and their populations have gone exponential since then. So birds change. All these raptors in your yard, Cooper's hawks, turkey vultures, owls, red-tailed hawks, all those birds, a century ago were being persecuted. People were taking shots at them because they didn't want to eat their chickens. Now they're moving into towns because that's where our conservation is, and that's where our resources are. Pollinators, right? So I'm obviously a bird person, so I'm thinking a lot about birds, but pollinators are important. Obviously, pollinators are food for our birds. So rethink pretty, I think, is a great idea here. So, in a lot of these neighborhoods, completely changed up. Native plants, prairies, shrubs, all those kind of things. Every little bit can help. The future of backyards is greater species diversity. We know birds are moving in there. I get reports all the time. Sandhill cranes up in Chicagoland area, they were gone from Illinois for 100 years, extirpated. There wasn't any. Now, we had a report last year of they're all in people's backyards. One of them ripped off the screen door and walked in someone's kitchen and was rummaging through their trash in their kitchen for food. It's a little extreme, but obviously they're coming back to using people's backyards. Conservation education is important. And I'm, again, a big believer every little bit of habitat counts, right? So there's lots of people out there, they do a little bit, that adds up. There's about 1.5 million acres of protected areas in Illinois. There's 20 million acres of corn and soybeans, and there's all kinds of backyards out there. And so we're not going to be able to keep purchasing lands for conservation. When we can, that's great. But if we can get 10% of people's backyards to do something better for wildlife, it'll be great. A really influential study came out about a year ago, I guess, talking about over the last 40, 50 years, we've lost about 2.5 to 3 billion birds. And a lot of these birds aren't super rare birds that are occurring in the boreal forest or in huge prairies. These are birds like grackles, and brown thrashers, and orioles that are living in your backyard. And so everything you can do in your backyard is a benefit. And then again, with this pandemic, I just gave a talk a couple of days ago about the impact of the pandemic on wildlife. And eBird is one of these software Cornell has. You can record your birds you see. So in May of 2020, they got over 26 million sightings, getting 36,000 bird observations every hour. So if you look at all the different metrics, people going out in nature during the pandemic skyrocketed. Here we approved our referendum for the Champaign County Forest Preserve District, but if you look across the United States and across the world when the election occurred, a lot of referendums passed, right? So they're going to now they voted to reintroduce wolves to Colorado. California had some, Texas had some, all these did. And a lot of these will come down to, it's great for the environment, and doing a little bit in your backyard will also help. So I know I've gone over a lot, right? So I've covered a lot of stuff today. We have lots of research going. I have lots of ideas about what you can do in your backyard. So feel free to contact me with any questions, or if you see a weird bird in your backyard, feel free to email me. There's lots of resources out there, either via Cornell Lab of Ornithology or Audubon has a lot of resources about what you can do in your backyard. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. And again, thanks for having me.
All right. Well, thanks so much for that, Mike. That's the beauty of, being a coordinator of these public programs. I always learn so much in all these programs. There at the end, you talked about, greater appreciation for wildlife. We had talked before this, but, at the Champaign County Forest Preserve District here in Central Illinois, during this whole pandemic this past year, a lot of staff members, have been talking, and, the traffic in the forest preserves has been greater than, you know, some have seen for quite a long time. And it's you know, I guess there's a silver lining with everything. So, you know, maybe that is one silver lining, is that we've got, you know, a greater appreciation for nature and wildlife over the past few years. Or I'm sorry, over the past year or so, with this pandemic taking place. So Mike is willing to answer a few questions here at the end, and I know some of you have already responded in the comment section. But if you have some questions, type those down below in the comment section. Would love to hear from you and your questions. Mike, quick question. You know, from me, it's on topic. It's not quite super topic specific here, but I'm curious. How did you get to do what you do? Is this something you've always wanted to do since you were a child? You know, did you have some experiences in school, or, you know, growing up? Or
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. So my dad was a science teacher, but then became a nurseryman. But then on his spare time, he led bird tours kind of around the world. And so if someone backed out of a bird tour, I got to go. And then when I was in high school, I got hired by the University of Illinois to kind of be a tech finding bird nests. And I never thought I would stay in Illinois and do my PhD, but you know, just the way it worked out. And so we actually here on campus in Champaign have one of the biggest bird research groups in the world. And so it's been great for me to stay here. You know, there's a lot of our students go on, and so it's and just kind of see how populations have increased, right? So I grew up in Illinois. When I was young, there was no bald eagles or pelicans, and you know, doing, you know, a little bit to kind of help the environment. It's been great.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of questions out here. So should I try to answer some of these questions, or
I can sort through these and then maybe throw some up here if that's okay.
Sure.
Since there's quite a few, and I was kind of
I'll answer this one real quick about bird monitoring tips and techniques. So obviously bird watching has become really, you know, the interest in that has grown really quickly, and there are relatively cheap binoculars you can get. You can go online, and Cornell and Audubon have them. So for my students, for $50 you can get good binoculars. And there's lots, you know, if you have an iPhone or Android, there's a lot of good apps out there. And you know, one thing I enjoyed is that when we're kind of stuck at home, I go out birding at you know, Busey Woods or Homer Lake or wherever, and you run to other bird watchers. So if you're in the area, there's a great community of people out bird watching. Just a couple of days ago, I had some random person corner me in a park and about bird watching, and I was happy to talk to them. And so there's lots of resources out there if you just kind of search for that. To especially if, you know, you're seeing birds in your backyard, the next step is to go to maybe Busey Woods or to River Bend or to one of the forest preserves, and then you can see more. I mean, I think last year I saw 230 species in Champaign County alone. And so that's the great thing about enjoying birds, is you can look at the cardinals in your backyard, or you can travel to South America and see thousands of species.
Yeah, I know the local birding community is pretty great here in the Champaign County area. I know I'm on a listserv, Bird Notes. People exchange emails back and forth when they cite specific species here and there. So yeah, there's a lot of good resources here in the area. We had a question from Leslie Hunt. She talked about, or she asked, referencing some of the trees and shrubs you mentioned earlier. You got any recommendations for where you could buy these, maybe for those locals who are watching, or, you know, just some generic places that could be anywhere?
Yeah. So there are native tree nurseries, but they cater more to like the forest preserve districts or the Fish and Wildlife. Locally, I think any nursery, if you just tell them you're interested in a hardwood that's a native, my experience, given working with my dad in the nursery business, is a lot of nurserymen don't know what birds are very much, but they know what native plants are going to thrive in certain areas. So around here, you know, country arbors and those kind of nurseries would probably be able to get what you're looking for. And you don't need to get a gigantic tree, right? So getting, you know, tree in a 5-gallon bucket, 10 gallon, you know, plant them, get them established, and get them go. And you know, some people think it's a huge investment to kind of get some of these oaks and stuff going in your yard, And it's really not. I mean, you don't need to get a huge tree because, you know, it's going to take a while to get going anyway. And so they'll catch up quick.
Margaret says she lives in a townhome, so she's limited as far as area goes for planting. You got any particular ideas for container planting?
Yeah, so I would say anything that provides some structure is really what you're looking for. You know, my mom lives in a very small house, and so she just has some potted plants in the front that some have flowers. She put some bird feeders up there, and I don't think she thought initially the bird feeders will work, but you know, give bird feeders time, get a little bit of a potted plant out there. Even, you know, obviously you can put non-natives out there like Norfolk pine or those kind of things, and you can get the birds to use it. Hummingbird feeders work out well. You know, little hibiscus trees in a pot during the summer, hummingbirds will come and feed on that. And so there's lots of opportunities. And again, you know, your local nursery will have some good ideas of what plant will thrive in a container.
Okay. Yasmin asking here, she's got a locust tree, 25 years old, rarely sees birds in there, but notices a family of squirrels. Would squirrels or other wildlife potentially deter birds?
Yeah, so squirrels and birds don't get along very well. We've done work where we put video cameras on nests and watch the squirrels come in and pop their heads off, and yeah, they're kind of mean to birds, and so they're not going to nest in an area where there's squirrels because the squirrels will eat their babies. Locust trees do typically have a lot of insects in the spring, so even if you have squirrels, you should get migrants going through there, but the squirrels can be a problem, and you know, people fight squirrels constantly. But again, you know, I think it's we take them for granted that we have squirrels. You know, I'm always entertained on campus when we have students show up, freshmen from particularly parts of Asia and China, and they stop and take, you know, selfies with squirrels because, you know, parts of the world, they don't have squirrels running around like this.
Yeah. Even Lake of the Woods Forest Preserve spotted a handful of black squirrels out there that visitors get quite a kick out of. Sandy asking about some technology here. She's got a bird bath heater. Wildlife seem to be thrilled. Do you have any thoughts on bird bath heaters or anything similar to that?
Yeah, so this time of year, well, especially when it freezes up, birds can be limited by water availability. And bird bath heaters, anything to keep water open, can be a big benefit. So you'll notice a lot of birds go there right before it gets dark and right when it gets light out in the morning. And it's because, you know, obviously if they're eating seeds, there's not a lot of water content in the seeds. And so they are water limited in the winter. And it doesn't really is important in the spring, summer, and fall, but in the winter, bird bath heaters can really attract a lot of birds to your backyard. And one of the interesting things, I don't have one, but I've seen them before, is that how dirty birds are, right? So birds will come clean themselves out and your water can get dirty fast, especially if you have starlings and doves in there. And so, but that's another way, if you want to see birds up close, put a bird bath heater out there and you'll get birds pretty quick.
Maybe we'll have time for maybe two more questions, if that's okay with you, Mike.
Sure, yeah.
Let's see. So kind of related to the last question, you know, talk about bird bath heaters, but Ross is asking, he's noticed he's having water sources in his garden, bird baths, etc. Seems to draw just as many birds as food. Do you have any recommendations for types of water options?
Yeah, so a lot of people are going to have a little water garden with a little water that's cascading. And I don't actually know why, but that definitely attracts a lot of birds. So migrating birds also, when birds migrate, one of the reasons birds migrate at night is because it's more humid and they lose less water. So birds' metabolism is so high, they actually get limited they have water stress. And so having running water attracts lots of birds. Also, it supports lots of insects. So having a little water feature in your backyard can really lead to a boom in birds. If you see really good pictures in magazines sometimes of birds, you'll notice they're at a water feature because there can really pack in the birds. So if you have the opportunity, it can really be a benefit.
Okay, maybe we'll take this last question here. So Catherine seems to have a water feature right in her backyard here, lives on a small lake. What are your thoughts about Canada geese? I know we've got quite a few in the area, and it's a contentious topic.
Yeah.
You got any
So
thoughts on geese?
I have a PhD student studying them. We're trying to figure out how to keep them out of flying in front of airplanes up in Chicago, Midway and O'Hare. Canada geese is the most controversial bird by far in Illinois. So if you ask people in Illinois, we've done this before, what they think about birds, most people like birds, want to see more birds. Then they'll write a diatribe about how they hate geese, in which they all would die. If you want to, one thing we suggest is if you don't mow areas up to the edge of lakes and let it be more natural, geese don't want to walk through really thick grass or little shrubs, and they don't want to fly because it's so energetically taxing for them. And so, but of course, people don't want to do that. They want to have a nice mowed area by the lake. We're working on trying to figure out. We have actually little cell phones on geese right now that have Fitbits. So they relay back to us their behaviors, how much energy they're using, how many steps they're taking a day, where they're at, that kind of stuff. And we model all that and try to figure out how to manage them. And they're smart, right? So people don't think Canada geese are that smart, but try to catch them. So they're a pretty smart bird, and they're actually a lot more fascinating than you might expect. So our geese in Chicago will breed along Lakeshore Drive, and then one day they'll fly to Churchill, Manitoba, hang out with polar bears for a couple of weeks, then fly back and hang out in the south side of Chicago. And,
wow.
They are, I would just take it. Don't hate them, right? So I always look at their value. They're interesting animals, but I know that they can't poop all over the place and cause problems.
It's amazing, the technology, you were talking about in the talk, as well as, what you just talked about now. It's what a beautiful marriage at the U of I to have a great engineering school as well as a college of aces, especially for what you're doing.
I mean, we have a great relationship with the engineering department, and we wouldn't be able to do what we do without them. They don't know what we're saying sometimes. We don't know what they're saying sometimes, but we figure it out, and it turns out to be really nice.
Yeah. Well, one last point here, which Lisa asks, thank you. Could Dr. Ward post his info on your page? What I could do, Lisa, and for others may be interested, as long as it's okay with Dr. Ward, would you mind if I shared your email and contact info in the comment section of this particular video? Would that be okay with you?
Sure. Yeah. Feel free to email me whatever question you have. I'm happy to help.
Okay. All right. Well, Mike, I really appreciate it. I learned so much. Thanks for, joining us for this talk. And, you really, I know that your work is, pretty complicated, I'm sure, in a number of areas, but you explained it to me that was very easy to understand. And it sounds like our audience very much enjoyed it as well too. We had quite a few people tune in tonight, which was great. So thanks everybody for tuning in tonight. And like I said, I'm going to post Mike's contact info in the comments section. Hope you all enjoy the rest of your night, and stay tuned for more programs in the Garden Speaker Series or other programs with Museum of the Grand Prairie and Champaign County Forest Preserve District. All right, everybody, take it easy. Good night.
Thank you.